Welcome to the Consciousness Anywhere and Everywhere podcast. I am Shannon O'Hara, and I invite you to a completely new world of possibilities. Hello. Welcome forward to this beautiful day in this moment that you are listening to this episode from the Consciousness Anywhere podcast. And since it is the first podcast release of the month, it is entity consciousness, entity positive related. Welcome to a series of podcasts that I have been creating for you guys that are talk to the entities specialty topic related. If you're just tuning into this for the first time, please note there are quite a few previous episodes that will focus on different areas where entities participate, show up, and how we can increase our awareness, our education, our tools, and our interaction with the spirit world. So if you are spirit positive, this is the place for you. If you are spirit negative, this might also be the place for you. If you want to learn more about this topic that is sort of treated in different ways, one being total disbelief, or another being total significance, or another being total reaction, and talk to the entities is the holistic education and empowerment system for everybody who is spirit aware and has never been empowered or educated to acknowledge your entity capacities and then learn how to actually practically work with the spirit world to make your life and the universe a lighter, brighter, and easier place. I am Shannon O'Hara, the founder and creator of Talk to the Entities. And today the focus and spotlight is on entities and creation. So I'm going to go ahead and read the blurb that's in the Talk to the Entity shop for the entities and creation, the original entities, creating with entities, Talk to the Entity specialty that I did. How many times can I say entities in this podcast? I think we're up to like 40. The original creating with entities class that I did in 2015. So 10 years ago. And this, during 2015 and 16, I created these Talk to the Entities specialty topics and did classes on them. For entities affect so many different areas of life, and they're really, so this was my attempt and my answer to that, to create more awareness on these different areas. Anywho, I'm going to read the blurb from the product, the class, the original class in the Talk to the Entities shop. What if there were a world of beings who would and could create with you if you were willing to receive it? Is this dangerous or a gift of magnitude? Learn how to create with entities and energies that are available for all of us that so few receive. What gift do the spirit world desire to gift to you for being you? I think I just found a typo there. Enjoy this 3-part telecall with Shannon. Well, enjoy this podcast with Shannon on creating with entities. So I feel like I always have to like break the ice in this really mega way in these podcasts, since these are for general public. And if you're just stumbling upon this for the first time and you know nothing about Talk to the Entities or Access Consciousness, which Talk to the Entities is a specialty class of, if you're just like spirit curious or however you came to this podcast, there is something that we have to, a playing ground that we have to acknowledge, which is that entities, i.e. spirits, i.e. beings without bodies like ours, exist. Being from a European descent culture like I am, entities were treated like they just didn't exist, right? But I have obviously worked with and gotten to know many other cultures on Earth over the years through the lens of Talk to the Entities. And my Indian friends would have a very different cultural and familial experience with the conversation of entities, as would my Japanese friends, as would my Mexican friends, as would, my Canadian friends, as would so many different cultures have so many different ways of dealing with spirits. And one of the things that I had to really come to terms with quite young was that I was aware of entities. And when I say come to terms with it, since I grew up in a spirit positive family, my parents were both very progressive, quite radical thinking. I did not come from a traditional family. I came from a family of seekers and big thinkers and people, my parents were looking for something different. And I grew up in an entity positive household. So one of the reasons I'm so entity capable now as a adult is due to my stepfather being very positive and very supportive. And my mother was also very positive and supportive, but my dad is the one who really gave me the tools and the sort of the backbone to be able to grow and develop Talk to the Entities. But even though I grew up in an entity positive household where it was okay to talk about entities and, it was a topic of discussion that was open in the household, I still knew that being aware of ghosts was weird, quote unquote, in my culture. And when I was, a teenager, I desperately wanted to just be normal and not be a freak. And I knew that if I admitted that I talked to entities, that it was like a judgeable offense. So I tried to shut it out and I tried to pretend like it wasn't happening. And that just hurt. It made me so depressed and angry because when you suppress an ability, and this is one of the things that I posit about being entity positive and acknowledging entity participation in the world, is because there are people who are aware of entities. And if that awareness is invalidated, i.e., they're told that they're making it up, because the mainstream mental health modalities do not acknowledge the existence of entities, which in my opinion is hugely dangerous to people's well-being and mental health. When you have the ability to be aware of entities and it's not acknowledged, it can twist into something very, very dark and very difficult, not really because being aware of entities is dark or difficult. In fact, for me, it's been dark, difficult, horrible, and depressing, and the greatest, most blissful, beautiful gift of my lifetime. Because the spirit world is diverse. And we're not just talking about like one kind of entity that's, used to be your grandma, although those exist, right? Like deceased relatives. But there's also great beings of light, and there's demons, and there's nature spirits, and there's all sorts of beings and energies that don't have names or definitions that exist. And when you're aware of entities and you don't acknowledge it, it just starts mutating into essentially psychological stuff and physiological stuff, which can be handled by dealing and working with and communicating with entities, i.e., using the tools of Talk to the Entities. But the first step is, I'm aware of entities, not I'm aware of entities, I must be crazy, right? That's like not the first step. That's a step in the wrong direction. So I had to acknowledge that I was aware of entities, and then I had to learn what that meant and how to work with that. Because if I could have ignored the entities, trust me, I would have preferred to have not had that. And that being said, talking to entities and creating with entities, which is the focus of today's podcast, has actually wound up to be one of, if not maybe the greatest gift of my lifetime, in that building a business called Talk to the Entities has necessitated, you got it, creating with entities, right? So I had no reference point for what it was like to actually work with entities. And most of us don't, because we're not taught to. And if we do come from a culture that acknowledges entities, it usually also comes with a huge amount of separation about like our superstition or significance about the wrongness of working with certain entities, or the significance that just distorts the easy, free flow of energy and capacity. And there are beings who will work with us to create. And this is, in my opinion, news to celebrate, but it also can be news that people can make very creepy and very weird. But let's face it, if we're being honest, it's like dealing with entities. We do have to include that people can be very creepy and very weird about entities. And there's that way of creating with entities where it's all about the heaviness or the control. It's like how many people come function from the point of view of, they want, and I've run into this a lot working with people over the years, is they want to have entities essentially be their servants. So they want to enslave entities, or they have relationships with negative entities or demons due to that the demons are promising them like that they'll give them a power that they don't already have, or that, you can have these codependent relationships with entities where the entities are telling you that you need them, or can be very gaslighting. And that's true. That totally exists, because relationships with entities and creating with entities is kind of like relationships with people and creating with people. So if we remove the idea that if it's with an entity, it's somehow completely different than with a person, you can start to see how relatable creating with entities and having relationships with entities is due to the way that what you have experienced with people. Are there a lot of super creative people in the world? Or are there some super creative people in the world? And then a lot of people who are fitting into, or following. So creation in and of itself is an interesting one to look at for like, what is creation? If we follow the information of Access Consciousness, creation is question, choice, possibility, and contribution. Creation is not conclusion. Creation is not problem solving. Creation is not limited. Creation is the process of being in question, asking questions, being in question, making choices. Choice creates, which leads to greater possibility. So creation accesses more possibility, not more conclusion, or not more linearity, not more finite. And that possibility then expands into a spherical, multi-directional contribution, which is where your creation, your being, is a contribution to everything. Because like oneness. And everything, including entities, is a contribution to you and your being. And now an advertisement sponsored by Consciousness. Have you heard of the Access.me app? The Access.me app is 25 plus years of Access Consciousness classes. Now, if that excites you or overwhelms you, let me tell you that some of the most life-changing, epically, no words to describe the profound transformation of my life and the accessing of infinite possibility I have gained through the classes that you'll find in the Access Me app. If you were to purchase each one of these classes individually, you would be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you were to attend each of these Access Consciousness classes, you would need to have been going to classes for 25 plus years, like me. But now, Access.me costs only $275 a month. So you're essentially renting these incredibly profound, priceless, literally invaluable classes that will access consciousness, transform your universe, and essentially educate you in areas that too often we really don't receive a good education. Like, how do we have easy, honoring, intimate, profound relationships with ourselves, with others? What would it take for magic to actually be what we turned to for having more money, for having more health? What would it take to not feel like all of your wishes and dreams for consciousness and lightness and being happy to not just be a stupid pipe dream that are never going to happen because what's honored here is density and intensity? Sure. And what do you know? Access.me is a treasure trove of possibility that you can subscribe to on a monthly basis to access more consciousness. How does it get any easier than that? Check it out, access.me online, and see you in the fields of consciousness. So that's the form of creation I'm talking about. Creation, and we're in a time where head processes are considered superior. Math, science, engineering, logic, thinking. Being in our heads, we are encouraged and manipulated and sometimes forced, i.e. school, to be in our heads due to, society, looking at our phones, thinking a lot, figuring stuff out. So does creation happen from the head, or is creation an interaction with the elements and the energies and the world around us on an energetic level, on a being level? And if you can create, wow, like so fun. For me, I have learned as I've gotten older that not everybody is super creative. And that's not wrong. It just is something that if you are trying to be right, that's not a creative position, right? So creation is the ability to follow the energy, to be enough in the question that you can discover things that don't already exist, that you can invent, you can innovate, you can change your perspective, you can produce art in whatever medium or form. You can produce creation in whatever form that comes in. You might be, there's the traditional arts that we know of: painting, drawing, music, singing, dancing. There's also, in my opinion, you can be very creative with money. You can be a very creative parent. You can be a creative spouse or partner. You can be very creative in your relationships. And you can be very creative if in life. My medium is my life. My life is my work of art. Every area of my life, every area that life it is: body, wardrobe, house, accommodation, food, how I experience the world, what my presence produces and what I contribute to the universe, the conversations I have with people, the choices I make on a daily basis, on the hundreds of things that we make choices on a daily basis. That's my art form. That's my masterpiece. That's the beautiful life and living, the expression of possibility, the joy of embodiment, the creating with all of the consciousness that's available. And what's the first step? Acknowledge that you're aware. Acknowledge that you do perceive. And when you acknowledge that you're aware, and when you're creating with entities, we're not just talking about like dead people or ghosts. We could also be talking about trees, right? Creating with entities, creating with the consciousness of the universe. Nature is one of the most present and participatory forces and animating energies that we experience on the planet. Creating with entities necessitates us to be present and to do this completely unusual thing called receiving. Now, why do I say it's unusual? Because for the most part, by the time you're adult, your receiving is pretty bad. We are not taught to receive. We are taught to get it right, to put barriers up, to not expose ourselves, to not be vulnerable. And if we're not taught that in our families, we're taught that in society, which is what it is. And if you're listening to this right now, I wonder what else you know is possible. And remember, one of those elements of creation that I spoke about earlier is choice. So to create with anything or anyone requires you to choose. And I assert that choosing to receive is one of the strongest creative positions that you could take. When I started out as a young adult in my early 20s, I was starting to facilitate access consciousness, which is the thing that my dad started that I loved. And I was so young and had no clue. And I pretty quickly got on to talking about entities and telling my story and showing up for what I could show up for the entity conversation, which is essentially the genesis of where Talk to Entities grew from. And I had no idea what Talk to the Entities would become. And just for some perspective, for those of you guys that might not know, Talk to the Entities now is a multinational entity positive corporation that comprises of hundreds of facilitators. There's a huge website with educational and empowering information. There are classes being facilitated in many languages all around the world all the time. Then I started basically with the book Talk to the Entities, and then that grew into what it is today. So Talk to the Entities has touched thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people's lives and cleared trillions of entities and made things so much lighter and brighter for so many people and for so many entities. So when I first started, I had no reference point. I had no clue what was possible. And I did copy my dad to a really large degree because he was creating and growing a consciousness-based business that empowered people and had really cool tools. So I created my own little mini-me version of my dad's business. And as I was going along, I would come to points where it felt like nothing was working. My classes weren't growing. I didn't have this sense of connection or inspiration, or I didn't really know what direction to go in. I would just feel sort of lost, like I was failing. I should just quit. I should give up. And what I eventually became aware of by being in the question, remember, question is the first component of creation. By being in the question, I realized that what was actually occurring was there were a lot of entities who desired to contribute, who were contributing and participating in the creation of Talk to the Entities that I was not acknowledging. So my lack of acknowledgement, i.e. my lack of receiving their contribution and their participation, was actually damming up the flow of possibility. So I had to start to receive from these beings. And when I say had to, it was sort of it felt difficult. It was so foreign and unfamiliar and weird and intense. And if you have not been receiving and then you start receiving, it can feel very foreign and very weird, especially when you're receiving from a bunch of contributing entities that you can't control, that you that you have no familiar reference point for. But one of the things that my dad taught me really early on, he would always ask me, he would say, are you willing to receive what you can't control? And are you willing to receive what you can't conceive? And that's really where I had to take my courage from, because so much of what was developed with Talk to the Entities over the years, I did not have a reference point for it. I had to discover it as it came. And there is so much that's possible that we cannot control, i.e. the universe. There is so much that's possible that we cannot conceive of. And if we can't conceive of it, does it mean it doesn't exist? So I had to start receiving from the entities, and I had to start recognizing where the entities were contributing and when they were being real shits. Because, I had years and years of doing Talk to Entities classes where the website would crash and people's registrations would go all weird. And one person would be able to pay with one payment link and then another person couldn't pay with the exact same payment link. And what we realized down the track, me and my staff, was that we were experiencing essentially what I call entity chaos, because entities can have a really big impact on technology and electricity. And so we had to start literally educating and facilitating our customers right from the beginning about acknowledging entities, working with entities, clearing entities, and or dealing with the entities that were participating in their registration process. And if you don't acknowledge that there is entities present or participating, then that's when it leads to all sorts of havoc, i.e., electrical problems, health problems, mental health problems. So receiving from entities is free. However, when I say receiving from entities, do you feel excited about that? Or do you feel like that's like foreign or creepy or forbidden or dangerous, you know? So it's like, how many, churches and cults and lifetimes were you like educated or disempowered or implanted or explanted to believe that working with entities was wrong or creepy or bad? And all the lifetimes you did do weird, creepy things with entities, because we've all done weird, creepy things with entities, which was a choice. And what do you want to create this lifetime? And if you remove all of the false, bad propaganda about entities that you've learned this lifetime, just think about the movies you've watched. The majority of movies, especially horror movies, turn the whole entity thing into a nightmare. Newsflash, that's not really what it's like. In fact, it's not even close to what it's like. There are a few movies that I believe come closer to expressing and showing what the spirit world is more like. One of them is I think it's called Lovely Bones. It was actually a book, and then they made it into a movie with Mark Wahlberg. And the subject matter, like a girl gets killed, but then the way that they show how so her spirit is trying to communicate with her dad and stuff. Actually, I haven't read the book. I only saw the movie. But the way that they showed what she experienced and what it was like for her as a spirit was, I thought, very accurate to what I have learned entities experience, because I talk to a lot of entities and work with a lot of entities. So there's Lovely Bones, and my all-time favorite spirit movie is Spirited Away by Studio Ghibli. That is a universe that is very awesome and real to me. And there's a couple of other ones, but the majority of what you see in movies and television about spirits is usually very significant and weird and not accurate. And so you have to realize that might be the majority of the information that people received about spirits was from movies. Do you think that sets you up on the right foot to actually be able to participate with the spirit world in a productive and positive way? Imagine that the only thing you were ever exposed to, with relationships. Imagine that your only sexual education was from pornography. Would that actually give you accurate, real connection to what sex was? Or does it give you this very violent, very intense, very non-dimensional idea of what sex is? And that's essentially what happens with spirit information in movies, is that movies give us this very sensationalized, very artificial, very non-dimensional, very inaccurate expression and experience of what the spirit world is. Which is why most people can't create with entities, i.e., the beings that desire to contribute to us, because there are beings, benevolent, beautiful beings who can and will participate with all of us. And if you can turn towards them and receive, not be controlling, oh, wow, then what else is possible? So if this topic is of interest to you and you want to learn more about this, please check out the Creating with Entities specialty. It's on the Talk to Entities website. Later on this month, I'll be hosting a roundtable with two other Talk to the Entities facilitators who are going to be sharing their insights, their tips, their tricks, their experience with creating with entities, and what would it take to include all entities, to judge none, and to what would and could a world of more spirit and awareness diversity be like? What if that's not a dream? What if that can be a reality? And what if that begins with your choice? I love you. How does it get better than this? Woo! Thank you for listening to this show. My target is to make consciousness easy to find and choose. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes and share this with somebody who you know who might be looking for more consciousness in their life. You can visit me on shannon-o'hara.com or talktotheentities.com. And to learn more about the amazing tools of Access Consciousness, you can visit accessconsciousness.com and be sure to subscribe to the podcast.